Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Tuesday, January 26, 2021, fiscal year 2022 and fiscal year 2023 budget workshop. Due to COVID-19 and in accordance with the latest Alameda County Health Order and with the Governor's Executive Order N2920, which suspends portions of the Brown Act, this meeting will be conducted remotely. In compliance with said orders, a physical location has not been provided for this meeting. These measures will only apply during the period in which the state or local public health officials have imposed or recommended social distancing. All board members are participating via teleconference. Roll call, Madam Secretary.
Directors Coleman,
Present.
Katz,
Present.
McIntosh,
Here.
Mellon,
Present.
Patterson,
Present.
Young,
Yep.
President Lenny.
Here. If members of the public wish to speak on agenda or non-agenda items, please raise your hand, use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. Comments on non-agenda items will be heard at the beginning of the meeting. Comments on about the workshop will be heard when the item is up for consideration, or I guess at the end of the meeting in this case. When prompted, please state your name, affiliation if applicable, and topic. Secretary will call each speaker in the order received. Each speaker is allotted 3 minutes to speak. However, I have the discretion to amend this time based on the number of speakers. Secretary will keep track of time and inform each speaker when his or her allotted time has concluded. Just ask if there is anyone who wishes to speak before the start of the workshop for any reason.
We have no one on the line for
Either
public
on
comment.
items, related to the topic or not related to the topic.
We have no one on the
I'm
line
sorry.
for public comment.
No one. Okay, great, thank you. All right, take it away.
Good morning. Today is the first of up to 3 workshops to discuss our fiscal year 22 and 23 budget and rates. In developing this budget proposal, we took into consideration the impacts of the pandemic, not only on the district, but the regional economy and our customers. And we feel that for fiscal years 22 and 23, and especially the next year, we need to be cautious, realistic, and flexible with our budget planning. For the water system, we're proposing rates that are lower than we previously shared with the board. And for the wastewater system, we're proposing to maintain the rates that were previously proposed. This especially considering the wastewater infrastructure tour and the workshop that we presented to you last November. I will say that our staff spent a tremendous amount of time to come up with a proposal that balances the economic reality of what we're seeing around us while still moving forward with our most critical projects. This required us to relook at our priorities, our staffing, and how we get our work done. In particular with staffing, it's going to require us to do a careful examination in the next year to understand our resource needs while also keeping in mind how we do our succession planning. And you'll hear more about this later in the presentation. Today, we're looking for the board feedback on our approach and our proposal. And with that, I will pass it off to Sophia Skota, our Director of Finance.
Good morning, board and members of the public. I'm happy to be here today to present the first of 2 and possibly 3 budget workshops to cover the rates and charges that would go into effect for fiscal years 22 and 23. So we'll start with going over the agenda for our workshop today. So we're going to start off with just a reminder of our kind of strategic plan and budget priorities, because the strategic plan really is what is driving our budget priorities. We'll go over the current economic landscape, and then we're going to cover the preliminary rate planning projections that staff has made at this point, given the considerations that the general manager mentioned for fiscal years 22 and 23. We will then have Jimmy come and kind of cover pieces of our water system capital improvement program that we weren't able to cover in our infrastructure workshop due to time, and because again, infrastructure is a major driver for our budget. And Jimmy will also cover our engineering and O&M staffing and contracting considerations. We'll have a brief time back together where I'll cover some of the SCC follow-up items that we had discussed during our SCC workshop and which the board wanted some response on. And lastly, we'll cover a workshop summary and a schedule for moving forward, and then we'll look to receive feedback from the board. With that, we can move into the first part of the agenda, which is strategic plan and budget priorities. So if we move to the next slide, this is a diagram that shows the budget process. And the first year is really assessing, evaluating what are our goals, what are the needs to achieve those goals. And then we develop as staff a capital program and a budget and rates that really support that. Then we go through kind of a review and approval process. And so that's the process. This is the process that we're in right now. We went through the assessment and evaluation process and have now developed a budget that we are presenting to you, the board of directors. Year 2 of this budget process cycle is implementing the budget, evaluating opportunities that are represented by the strategic plan changes that we've made. So what you'll remember is that we took the KPIs out of the strategic plan, and so that makes the strategic plan more of an evergreen document. And so what we're proposing is, rather than reviewing the strategic plan this year, looking for opportunities to leverage staff that normally would be working on that effort to some other strategic efforts that will help the district move forward with our goals and priorities. And then moving back into the mid-cycle budget update to let the board know where we are, how we're doing with the budget that we had set for ourselves and with our goals and priorities. So again, this is just sort of a graphic that shows our 2-year process. And as I've described where we are at this point, which is that we're presenting the budget that we've developed essentially to the board and to the public. On the next slide, what we'll see here are our strategic plan goal areas. So long-term water supply. So we know there are drivers here, uncertainty related to climate change, as was covered by Director Eileen White in our Sustainability and Energy Work Committee just earlier this morning. We know that there are some upcoming decisions with regards to Los Vaqueros participation. When we move on, there's water quality and environmental protection as one of our key strategic plan goals. And we know that with a new administration in office that there is potentially going to be a change in focus, and so those new areas of focus are going to again drive what our goals will look like and how we will react and respond to those. Long-term infrastructure investment. Again, today we're going to be having some follow-up from Jimmy with regards to the water part of our infrastructure. And then long-term financial stability. And these are goals that we've been working on together, the board and staff, over a number of years, and have been making great progress. There's customer and community services, and then workforce planning and development, because none of this happens without a strong, trained workforce. So with that, let's move on to the next slide. So here, just the reminder again that strategic plan is what is driving the budget. And on the right side, alongside each of our strategic plan goals, we've just outlined some of the updates and workshops that we've been presenting to the board that we've worked on together over the past year. So again, Los Vaqueros expansion, long-term water supply updates that will be given again, just I think next month in February to the board, water quality and regulatory compliance reporting, energy policy, climate change, as we just talked about in the prior committee meeting. There were some infrastructure tours, a virtual tour of the wastewater plant this last fall, capital project updates that are given regularly to the board. And then the work again that I'd mentioned on long-term financial stability. So workshops, and then most recently the SCC update that we heard at a workshop in the fall of this year. On customer and community services, we have a lot of work on our customer assistance programs that has been underway, and you'll be receiving a report from Andrew Lee coming up here in February. And a lot of work has been done on our no water shutoff policy, as well as on emergency preparedness and business continuity. With regards to workforce planning and development, some of the big areas of focus during the last year have been on our diversity and inclusion master plan, and there definitely are dollars and resources built in to support these efforts in this budget. and also our work on implementing the racial justice and equity resolution that was passed by the board of directors. We also continue to work on our values efforts and organizational improvements to move our organization forward, making us stronger. Moving on to our next slide. The themes for this budget are sustainability and resilience. So that's really a foundation. So that carries through all aspects of the strategic plan. And also the second theme, kind of need for cautious, realistic, and flexible outlook as we look at this budget and as we carefully consider what's going on with our ratepayers, in the local economy, with our businesses, and making sure that we're balancing all of those against our needs to continue to move forward with our infrastructure investments. Moving on to the next slide, we're moving into what is the current economic landscape. We've given some updates over the past year. And so moving on to the next slide, let's start with some local, state, and federal updates. So initial FY21 deficit projections for Oakland were 62 million, Berkeley 40 million, Richmond 29 million, and San Francisco across the Bay more than 300 million. The state of California imposed a 2-day per month furlough, so that's equivalent to approximately a 9.2% pay cut, although FY21 revenues have been better than projected. The Legislative Analyst's Office is continuing to project a growing budget deficit. With respect to prospects for federal aid to water utilities, while we continue to seek federal assistance, prospects are not certain. And accordingly, the budget does not assume any aid is forthcoming. And I believe that Marlene Dumaine will be providing an update in the afternoon. So moving on to the next slide. With regards to our local government impacts, let's get a little bit deeper into what's going on with the City of Oakland, which is one of our very large stakeholders. $62 million budget deficit due to police overtime and decreased tax revenues. And the actions that the city has taken to date include a layoff of temporary employees, a furlough of non-union staff, a delay of the expected pay raises that were to go into effect this month in January for at least 6 months, and also the institution of a hiring freeze. They're expecting to cut spending between 10 and 20% when they look backwards at the end of this year. Moving on to the next slide. So this covers the LAO from the state office, their report from November of 2020. So again, what they were sharing at that time was that while the state was undergoing a recovery, it was somewhat uneven. So it was a faster rebound than had been expected, but many Californians, particularly those in low-wage jobs, remained out of work. So a lot of those in food services industries, et cetera. But that many, most actually, of high income earners were still working. So the spring deficit was expected to be $54 billion budget deficit. But they did note that tax revenues had been greater than anticipated. And at that time, they were expecting a windfall of about 26 million. So with the state facing operating deficits, while there still is projected to be an operating deficit, a recent report just in the last 10 days or so reports now that windfall is expected to be more on the order of 15 billion. And some of this is because of some state constitutional requirements that require that some funds be placed in the state's rainy day fund, et cetera. But the bottom line is that revenues are increasing slower than expenses. So that's why we're seeing this net sort of issue at this point. Moving on to the next slide. This is a chart that shows unemployment history. And so this goes back, you can see here, 2011-12. So just, recovery from the 2008-9-10 sort of period. And so you can see that unemployment declines, and then you see the sharp increase essentially in unemployment numbers. So our local counties have seen record high and low unemployment during the past year, just because the year started out, everything seemed like it was going to be great, and then the reality of the pandemic really hit. With regards to Contra Costa and Alameda, we both in April of 2020 had 14.5 and 14% unemployment. And at this point, we're probably, somewhere in the, I think, 6% range, something like that at that point. Across the state, California's unemployment is over 8%, or it was in December, and that's the 5th highest state nationally. So continue to struggle with unemployment. Next slide. With respect to the employment impacts, this uneven recovery is particularly hitting leisure, hospitality, retail, and transportation, of course. Construction has recovered, and as of October, employment had rebounded to 99% of the pre-pandemic levels. I have seen some projections nationally that there's an expectation that this has been slowing a little bit, but we haven't seen that here locally yet. So the next slide shows a chart of the Bay Area rental market. And what this is the percent change in the average rent for a 1-bedroom apartment between November 2019 and November 2020. And so what you'll see there in these areas is that people were moving, for example, to areas like Sacramento. So you see there a plus 15% increase, whereas you see a minus over 20% decrease in the San Francisco urban area. And so you'll see, cities like Houston, Dallas, Austin, rent increases and decreases in areas like New York, Seattle, Oakland, San Francisco. So this, we wanted to show this to you because this may portend, what we may see with respect to future development of housing, given that that's been a major driver for SEC revenues, particularly in our core urban area here. Next slide. So with regards to recovery from COVID-19, at this point, over 2% of our district staff are known to have contracted COVID-19. It's unclear when our normal operations will resume. We don't at this point have everyone reporting back to the office, et cetera. Approximately 40% of our staff continue to telecommute. With regards to our customer and local business recovery, we know that many local businesses will face a steep and difficult recovery, and that many of our residential customers are financially stressed. We know that bill payment delinquencies, have been increasing somewhat, and we don't know exactly, what that trajectory is going to look like as we come out of the pandemic. In terms of unknown long-term impacts, there could be impacts to development patterns, as we saw that rental graph was, telling, and something to watch. Patterns of economic activity may be different, and there may be changes to societal activities and business practices. It was pointed out when we were looking at where we see growth in our water supply that one of the expectations in retail and commercial were kind of the growth in these sort of experiential sort of malls, places where people would go to have experiences. Well, the pandemic may have cooled the taste for a lot of kind of public activities or togetherness. We don't know. Or maybe not. The roaring 20s followed the last pandemic. So next slide, FY22 and 23 rate planning. So having kind of covered that the strategic plan is really what's driving our budget priorities, and having covered what the expectations are with regards to our local economy and what will be faced by our residents, we took all of that information and basically started looking at, well, what does a fiscal year 22 and 23 budget look like, trying to balance the reality of what our community is experiencing with the need to continue to invest in infrastructure and move forward with the district's priorities. So again, the themes that we had talked about, cautious, realistic, and flexible. So cautious in considering the pandemic impacts on our regional economy, on water sales, on our collections. Realistic in recognizing financial stress of our customers, cities, local agencies, and really taking that as an opportunity to reevaluate spending priorities and strategies. Flexible in adapting to the current environment and being able to move forward again with the critical work, as we had discussed. Okay, so let's take a minute now and look at our revenue sources. Where do our revenues actually come from? And on the left, you'll see the water revenue pie graphic, and on the right, the wastewater revenue pie graphic. So with regards to water sales, 80% of our revenue coming from that category, water sales, about 7 coming from SCCs, 6, so pretty close to that, coming from property taxes, and then other power sales, interest income, leases, etc. On the wastewater side, about 55% coming from wastewater treatment revenue, almost 20% coming from wet weather treatment revenue, 8% coming from resource recovery, 4% from property taxes and capacity charges, and then other power sales, interest, and leases. So this is just a reminder of where our revenue is coming from. So this is actual for FY20. Moving on to the next slide. Let's visit some of the key financial planning assumptions that we built into when we were into the model, essentially, when we were looking forward. So with regards to water consumption, the projections for 22 and 23, 144 and 146. We continue to believe that these are good numbers that we should stick with. We did sell more water than this last year. We sold 148 almost million gallons per day of water, and we're tracking to sell at least that at this point. We had a very dry fall and early winter, but we could be going into a drought. And so we continue to feel that these are prudent numbers to use as we look to make forecasts. We did reduce our SEC revenue down from 40 million to 25 million, reflecting the possibility of the changes from the SEC study that we covered in the fall. We've also reduced our interest earning rate to 0.25%. I just reported that our last earnings were 0.29% in our committee meeting this morning for finance. And we also reduced our borrowing rate because, again, borrowing rates are lower than they have been. And so that's positive for us. And so we've brought that down to 4%. The work of the Capital Steering Committee resulted in CIP deferrals so that we could really meet the needs of looking at, what can we do to delay or defer while still moving forward with critical projects. And on the wastewater side, there's reduced resource recovery program and power generation station energy revenues as wastewater looks to optimize that program for nutrient loading, and reduced capacity fee revenue to correspond with the reduced water usage. And so the water use changes, the assumptions feed into the wastewater capacity fee as well. So let's move on to the next slide.
Could I ask a question, Sophia, while we're
Yes.
while we're at the last slide?
Please.
At the reduced borrowing rate, reduced earning rate, seems to me that the more important for us is the reduced borrowing rate. The more
Yes.
that goes down, I mean, they somewhat follow together, but the more that goes down, the better the impact for us. Or can you kind of give me some sense of the interaction between?
Yes, that's an accurate intuition, Director Lenny, that it's more important for us to have a reduced borrowing rate than an interest rate. So, I mean, we're certainly not, in any kind of an arbitrage, sort of business or anything like that. So our ability to borrow at low rates is very positive, and we'll be receiving a report next month about WIFIA. So we have been selected to move forward to continue down the WIFIA road process, which means that it is highly likely that we will in fact be the recipient of a federal WIFIA loan program, which would mean very low borrowing rates for the projects that we included during that borrowing. So even lower than what this borrowing rate is. So your intuition is correct that that's a key number for us.
Right.
On the interest rates on our bonds that we sell, what is that current interest rate level?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to measure it, but I would say if you say that the outstanding life on average of the debt is 20 years or something like that, because some of it was sold, 2 years ago and some of it was sold, 28 years ago, I would say that the remaining is probably somewhere around 3.5%. But that's because, again, it's not all, some of it, we're already part of the way through our mortgage. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it basically tells me it's better to buy EBMUD bonds and put money in the bank.
Currently, that is true.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Okay, so moving on to our next slide. This is just a graphic that shows actual versus projected water sales. And so the main point that I wanted to make with this particular chart is that you see the purple line, which is the rate setting sort of projection, and then the orange, which is the actual projection, the actual sales. So what you'll see there is back in the early 2000s, up through about 2013, we were continuing to project that we were going to sell more water than we actually were selling. And so that was a problem, essentially. So when the orange line is below the purple line, we effectively have a gap in revenue. And so what we've been trying to do and have done successfully is change that. And so you'll see, as of kind of 2018 or so, that we're tracking closer. We want to be close. We don't want to, assume that we're going to sell nothing and sell a lot. But we definitely prefer for them to be close and for the orange line to be above the purple line. So that was my main point with this slide. Moving on to the next slide. This shows our water and wastewater rate planning, historical and projected. So what you'll see here is for fiscal years 18, 19, 20, and 21, the adopted rate increases and the previously projected rate increases. So what you'll see there is that we had rate increases projected at 5.57755, had higher projected actual rate increases in FY18 and 19 than we thought we were going to need, again, trying to rebaseline around the lower water sales. And what you'll see now is that we had projected 5% and 5% for fiscal years 22 and 23 the last time we visited this 2 years ago, but that currently our planning assumptions are at 4% and 4%. So a 20% decrease over what we had shown last year, reflective again of the current environment for our local ratepayers, businesses, and others as we seek to move forward with our key infrastructure projects, continue our maintenance investments that we have been making, and yet, trying to be cautious as we kind of look into the future. On the wastewater side, we are maintaining the 4% and 4% planning assumption, matching the previously projected.
Excuse me, Sophia, Director Young has her hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry, Director Young.
That's okay. I just raised it. So just a question. Do we have, what are our CPI projections for 22 and 23? I mean, how much about I guess I'm trying to understand where the 4% is compared to what we, general inflation.
Sure. I believe the Bay Area CPI in December was somewhere in the realm of 1 to 2%. So I think it was somewhere maybe 1.5%.
Okay, so it's quite a bit lower than the standard CPI,
Yes,
which is around 3.5, right?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. So, moving on to the next slide. So the updated rate targets that we've just shown you are reflected basically of the current economic landscape and staff's efforts to really work to minimize the rate increase that we are proposing. These lower rate increases than our previous projection do require some reductions in our planned operating programs and capital projects, but we definitely are able to continue to maintain and upgrade our infrastructure. Those were the key issues. In terms of potential issues that we might face, we have labor agreements that need to be renegotiated. And there is, again, the recovery from the pandemic, both for the district and for our communities at large. So moving on to the next slide, we thought we'd give you a sense of what we're seeing out there with respect to other agencies that are in our business and in our local area. So the SFPUC implemented already previously planned 8% increases on approximately 8% on the water and wastewater side in July of 2020, paired with a very dramatically expanded CAP program. At this point, they expect to move forward with some kind of a rate increase, although it is not clear what that rate increase will be. Again, paired with this expanded CAP program. Contra Costa Water District adopted a February 2021 3.75% increase, so that will be going into effect in the coming weeks. Dublin San Ramon Services District implemented approximately a 1.6% increase on the water side in October, and that was based on the June 2020 CPI. So Director Young, here's another measure of CPI during the last year. Moving on to the next slide. Other agencies that had no increase or a delayed increase include Alameda County Water District, which voted to have no increase last month in December. And also notable that the SFPUC did not pass on a wholesale water increase to their customers. And we received that information from the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency. The city of Hayward chose to delay their planned 3.1% water increase that was supposed to go into effect October of 2020 to January of 2021. And they also moved forward with a planned 4.4% wastewater increase. So they did not delay that increase. Marin Water delayed their June 2020 vote on a 4% increase until April of this year. So they'll be voting on that in the coming months. North Marin Water voted to delay their 6% planned increase from July of 2020 to October of 2020. And they have been reevaluating their fiscal years 22 through 25 recommended rate increase. The city of Palo Alto, they had no increase in water or wastewater for FY21. And there isn't one planned for FY22 as of the present, but it remains to be seen. Pleasanton, the city of Pleasanton had no water or wastewater fiscal year 21 increase and delayed their planned rate study due to COVID. Valley Water voted for no increase for July of 2020 and is considering increases for 22 that could be up to getting close to 10%. And Zone 7, who is a wholesaler of water, voted not to implement their approved 6.7% FY21 increase.
Sophia?
So, yes.
Director Coleman has his hand raised.
Thank you, Clifford. Sophia, quick question. For those
Yep.
agencies that have delayed their increases this year or reduced them significantly, where did they make up the difference in terms of funding to operate their budget? Was it, I'm sure it's a number of items, but are you going to go into that or later?
No, we didn't survey them on exactly how they chose to make up those deficits. Essentially, it's not clear whether they used reserves or put off capital projects. We don't know, but we can certainly follow up.
I think from my perspective, I think that would be interesting to know that with the agencies you have listed here, what they're not going to be, what they have decided not to do, and where the funds are going to be made up to operate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, moving on to the next slide. We did want to point out that the district currently bills on behalf of Oakland, Berkeley, and Emeryville for their sewer collection charges. And we receive about $2.3 million in revenue every year for these billing services. Oakland implemented the first phase of their CAP for their sewer collection charge, and I think we'll be hearing more about these programs from Andrew Lee next month at the CAP workshop. But so far, Berkeley and Emeryville have not made any commitment to CAP for their sewer collection charges. We do know that the district can consider not renewing these contracts in 2023, and we thought the board might be interested to know what would the rate impact be essentially from the loss of that revenue, and it's about 0.3% on rates. Okay, so moving on to the next portion of our workshop, I'm going to pass this on to Jimmy Yoloye, who will be returning to the topic of our water system capital improvement program. Again, capital being a big driver for our budget and the work that we do. So Jimmy, I'm going to pass it on to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sophia. Good morning, President Lee and members of the board and staff. I'm going to start with an overview of the water system capital improvement program. If we can move to the next slide. So if you will recall, our capital improvement program is driven by A couple of things. We do a number of master plans and studies that define the work that we need to do to maintain, upgrade our facilities. And then we have operations and maintenance experience that helps to inform those plans along with the master plans. And that's what we use to develop our capital improvement program. So the fiscal year 22 to 23 CIP will continue our focus on infrastructure renewal. We're not looking at expanding service or anything in that regard. So we're focusing on renewal of our facilities. And we're prioritizing those based on safety, reliability, and water quality, with an overall goal to continue to support sustainability and our sustainability and resilience goals. If we move to the next slide, this actually shows you in comparison what we had previously planned for the CIP 2 years ago versus what we're currently proposing. And you will notice that even though our CIP is gradually increasing, we are proposing an increase that is a lot less than we thought about 2 years ago. So we've reduced it, what we projected previously, by about $300 million. So it's about a 7% increase in the CIP versus what we projected 2 years ago, which would have been about a 21% increase in the CIP. So if we move on to the next slide and see how does this CIP breakdown, it's about a $2.2 billion total. And again, we see that we have the largest percentages on our pipeline program, which includes our pipeline rebuild and also our large diameter pipelines. It's about 42% of the total. And then when you add the improvements to water treatment plants of about 20%, those two programs alone are about 60% of the overall effort. The other infrastructure asset classes that add to that, the raw water facilities and our pumping plants and reservoir rehabilitation programs are the next items. And combined, those 5 major asset classes total over 80% of the capital budget. We've got water recycling at about 3%, and then a category of other, which includes improvements to our recreational facilities, improvements to building facilities, fleet upgrades, information systems upgrades, water supply planning, and security improvements. So that really is the breakdown of our program. So if we move to the next slide. So this bears a little bit of explaining. These are some of the categories of infrastructure replacement that are kind of recurring. So these are things that we try and do a little bit of every year. We've got rehabilitation of steel tanks and pumping plants. And then the last series all kind of relate to the pipeline effort, regulators and rate control stations and the meters, help with flow control and pressure control on our pipeline system and help reduce water loss. And then there's obviously the pipeline rebuild program, which right this year is at about 20 miles per year. We're continuing to increase our pipeline replacement. And then out to the year 2030, we're hoping to get up to about 37.5 miles per year. So this is what we had previously projected in the CIP 2 years ago. So if we move to the next slide, we'll see how this has now changed. Because we're trying to be very cautious and because of the current economic landscape and the fiscal constraints that we have on the CIP, a number of these projects have been deferred. So you'll see for the steel reservoirs, we're not going to be doing any in 2022 and 2023. Pumping plants, we've been able to stagger the implementation of some of these projects to help with the water treatment plant projects. And for the steel reservoirs and pumping plants, we used to have a goal of about doing 3 tanks every year. If you recall, when we updated the strategic plan, we changed that target to a long-term average of about two tanks and 2 pumping plants rehabilitated each year. And that's because we had done such a good job in the 2000 teens to get ahead of our rehabilitation on those efforts. What that has allowed us to do is to be a little bit more flexible in how many of these facilities we do each year. The other thing I wanted to note on this slide is that the pipeline rebuild program in the next, in FY22, 23 and through 25, we are maintaining the goals that we set 2 years ago. We did reduce the mileage goal a little bit in FY26, which kind of through 2030, if you recall on the last slide, it was going up to 37.5 miles per year. And in this slide, it shows going up to 35 miles per year by 2030. So we did look at shortening that a little bit in recognition of the fact that we have recognition of the current economic crisis and the fact that we do need to be cautious in how much we increase the CIP. So if we move to the next slide, this shows, again, for our major projects. So these are generally one-time projects that improve the infrastructure. And this is what we projected 2 years ago. The 4 major categories here are the water treatment plants, our raw water facilities, open cut reservoirs, and our large diameter pipelines. These are generally sequenced in a logical fashion. So the San Pablo Clearwell project, which is currently underway on the open cut reservoirs, that needs to be in place before we do the Orinda disinfection project, because we have outages associated with that require the San Pablo Clearwell to be in service. And then similarly, the Central Reservoir project, before we can do that, we need to have reliable service at Orinda and USL. And so those projects need to be completed before the Central Reservoir project starts. In recognition of the fact that we do need to be cautious and the fact that some of these projects, many of these projects are very complicated and difficult to design. And so there have been some natural extensions of time during the design phase. But in addition, the fiscal constraints due to the current pandemic and our need to be cautious have also caused these to change. So if we move to the next slide, if you see what we are proposing in the current CIP, you'll notice that a lot of these projects have shifted to the right in terms of the delay of the implementation. And the other thing I forgot to mention is that these graphics show when the construction would actually occur. So that what doesn't show on this slide is the time it takes to do any planning or design to get to this point. But in general, we have delayed a number of projects. The only ones on the slide that kind of stayed the same are the ones that are currently in construction, the San Pablo Clearwell and the Wildcat pipeline in Berkeley. But in general, a number of these projects has been deferred. The main ones that got deferred are the Sobrante reliability improvements, the Walnut Creek treatment improvements, the relining projects on the McKellamie and the Lafayette Aqueduct. The Leland Reservoir replacement also got deferred, and then the Central pipeline also got deferred. Those are probably the major ones that got moved out of the current 5-year period, and that's probably the largest component of how we got down reduced the CIP by $300 million.
Jimmy, I noticed also, I don't know if you were just talking about the pipelines, but Central Reservoir at least has been extended some, right? Leland Reservoir delayed, Central Reservoir extended. It starts the same time, but goes for a longer period of time. Is that right?
That it does go for a longer period of time. So Central actually, Central. Sorry, I misspoke. Central actually didn't move. It was just Leland that moved out.
Yeah. So my question is, when I look at this, and we're thinking about the rates down the line, all this movement, is this basically the result of reducing our rate increase from 5% down to 4%? Or is there other factors in needing to do these changes from what we've?
That's an excellent question. I think the major component of the delays is the rate increase, but we also do have, as I mentioned earlier, some natural delay in the projects because they're complicated. They probably have taken a little longer for us to design than we originally anticipated. And then the other element is resource constraints that we may have that in terms of getting designs done or implementing construction. So that has some influence in the delay. It's not a huge component when you look at it at this macro level, but there definitely is a component of resource constraint that has contributed to it.
All right, because I know that, you know, when we move forward, and I appreciate all the work, obviously, in trying to keep rates low given economic circumstances and everything. But it's nice to kind of have that comparison in our minds as to this is what you get with 4%, this is what you get with 5%. This picture is a little bit cloudy as to which is, you know, due to complexities, as you say, and which is due to an effort to keep rate increases down.
Yes. I understand that, President Linney. I will say the biggest component here is they do overlap, but the biggest component is the fiscal constraint.
Yeah.
By deferring the projects, you do help with it helps with the fact that some of the projects are a little bit more complicated and naturally get deferred. And it also helps with the resources we have available to do the work.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so if we move on to the next slide, I wanted to just talk a little bit about the wastewater system capital improvement program. And on the next slide shows the pie chart for the breakdown of the wastewater capital improvement program. This is about this is a $276 million program. The largest component of the program is renewing aging infrastructure, as Director Eileen White had mentioned during the last infrastructure workshop and presented the wastewater master plan. This reflects the outcome of that master plan, and the aging infrastructure is the largest component that needs to be addressed. There are also seismic upgrades to the facilities. There are regulatory compliance issues, and the dewatering building has its own category. As you recall, during that meeting, that was a particular facility that needs some attention. So I just wanted to include this in here to give you a sense for what the priorities are for the wastewater CIP. And I think that's it on the capital improvement programs. Right now we are scheduled for a break. Clifford, I don't know if we wanted to continue with that or.
Yeah, so we have about 15 slides left in the workshop, and we do have this built-in break for about 10 minutes. We can take the break right now, or if the board would like, we can just continue with the workshop.
How are people
Wouldn't mind
feeling?
5 minutes, 5 or 10.
Why don't we take a 10-minute break and come back at 10:05?
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay.
Angelo, if you can see me, we're ready.
All right, we'll call the meeting back to order.
Yes.
All right, Clifford, take it away.
So we're going to move on and talk about the engineering and operations and maintenance, staffing and contracting, and I'm going to pass this back to Jimmy.
Doug, don't you have to do a roll call?
That would be a question for our secretary.
You already,
No
so
roll call.
we can do a roll call. You ready?
I think you have to do it when you come back from a break because of the format that we're in.
Oh, really? Okay.
Ah, thank you for that. Directors Coleman,
Present.
Katz,
Present.
Lenny,
Present?
McIntosh,
Here.
Mellon,
Present.
Patterson,
Yes.
Director Young.
Present. I would just say that's what we do in our retirement board meetings. I'm not sure that we've actually had that practice over the last bit in our meetings. They're very by the book over at retirement board.
Well, when Director Young was president, we didn't take any breaks. So we never put that to the test.
Oh.
Well played, Doug.
All right.
And so
Onwards and
true.
upwards. Go ahead, Jimmy.
All right. All right, so let's move on to the next slide and the next one after that. So I wanted to give you, kind of have a discussion here, present about staffing and contracting and what we've looked at in this budget cycle. As both Clifford and Sophia have mentioned earlier, this is a time where we need to be cautious with our budget plans in light of the current economic crisis and pandemic. But I wanted to frame the discussion here with this slide. We do recognize that our investment levels in capital infrastructure have probably about doubled since 2012. This is a conscious approach for on the district's behalf to continue to invest in our infrastructure. Over that time, we've had about 232 additional FTEs funded since 2012. That's about 176 of those were on the O&M side and about 56 on the engineering side. But as we've continued to grow our infrastructure program and invest in staffing during that time, we also recognize that increased staffing grows the long-term cost structure of the district and also increases our vulnerability to challenging economic times such as recession and environmental times with droughts. So we want to remain flexible to adapt to these changing conditions. And there are trade-offs that must be made in order to remain flexible and adaptable. So if we move to the next slide, this is just for the engineering and construction department, but it gives you an idea of how our budgeted cash flow and workload has changed over time since the early 2000s. So this is a graph that shows in the light blue bars are what we had budgeted for capital cash flow, and the red bars are what we actually spent in each of those years. If you go back to the early 2000s, you see a little peak there. That's when we had the improvements at the Walnut Creek treatment plant. So we had a little spike there. The little spike in FY8 and 9 was for the FSCC project. And then right after that, there was the big recession where we dropped back down to a low in about 2011, 2012. But since then, steadily, the amount of investment in our infrastructure and the capital cash flow has gradually been increasing all the way up to last fiscal year. And you see the projection for fiscal year 21. And then in the future years, it continues to rise. We expect that we don't know how long this increase will go, but we think it'll go probably to about 2030 before it starts to fall back down, or will have fallen down to about where we are now by 2030. it is unclear as to whether that's exactly what will happen, and it's one of the things that we still need to look at. But this graph gives you a sense for how our investments in capital infrastructure are trending. So if we move to the next slide, one of the things I wanted to discuss here is that there's always been a lot of discussion about contracting out to support district infrastructure goals. And we know that contracting has always been a part of past CIPs, and the proposed CIP will require some additional contracting, actually a fair amount of additional contracting. And that is really to deal with a lot of the construction activity that we have coming up. One of the other points here is that, stretching out the CIP schedule to match what our existing staffing levels are and existing contracting levels are, tends to increase the risk to those aging facilities. So there is a balance we need to maintain between not going too slowly so that we don't have facilities that continue to age and then fail when we least expect them to, with doing things a lot quicker, and which means you need more resources in order to do it in a quicker fashion. The last point I wanted to make here is that the vacancies and absences have the greatest impact on resources during the construction phase, whether it be for pipeline rebuild or in building new facilities like treatment plants or pumping plants, because once the construction is started, you kind of need to maintain some level of staffing to manage those efforts, to continue to build those projects. And delaying construction that is in progress becomes very expensive. The cost of delay is extremely high. And in this particular area, contracting does provide us the greatest flexibility to ramp up when we need to, or to ramp down if projects get delayed in the planning or design phase. So if we move on to the next slide, wanted to kind of refresh on what the district's approach to contracting out has been. The decision to contract out is made through a very thoughtful process. We consider a lot of issues in doing that. We do meet with the unions regularly to discuss plans and approaches, usually on specific projects. And usually our reasons to contract out work are fourfold. One, it's usually for a peak workload or the need for temporary support. In areas where there's expertise or technology that the district does not have. And also in areas where work is not usually performed by district staff. And this is one where I think as we move to a lot of construction effort, responding to planned and unplanned absences and vacancies, this is probably going to take on a more important role in the construction area. So if we move on to the next slide. So given some of those issues, here is what our strategy is for fiscal years 22 and 23 only. And we, in the budget, we have funded about a net of about 16 full-time equivalents compared to fiscal year 21, while trying to also continue to move forward with our critical priorities.
What was, Jimmy, what was you left out compared to FY21, but what's the number from FY21?
Oh no, this is 16 increased over what we had in fiscal year 21, what we had budgeted in fiscal year 21.
Okay, all right. That's just awkwardly worded. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So one of the things, in order to kind of make, this is a limited amount of increased resource funding. About 3 of these FTEs are on the engineering side, and about 13 of those are on the O&M side. There have been a number of positions funded in order to reduce the amount of FM&O contracting that's been included in the budget. So as you saw earlier, we did adjust CIP schedules. And as I said, a lot of that is due to the fiscal constraints, but some of that also is to address resource constraints, primarily in the design area. One of the things that we have done, because we have a fairly large, a much larger increase in what we need to construct for designs that have been done over the last 2-3 years, we have actually are moving a number of engineering staff from their usual design functions to help out during construction, about 9 FTE. So rather than add engineering staff to manage the construction, we've actually matrixed some design staff over to the construction side. But even with this effort, we expect an increase in project specific, and we're proposing an on-call contracting type approach to help with ramping up and ramping down construction management and inspection efforts in the next couple of years. Recognizing that this is a short-term measure because of the current fiscal crisis, we do plan on taking a long-term look at capital and operating staffing needs and options by the spring of 2022. So the idea is to take a look at this in the mid-cycle of our 2-year budget, when we're not under the same pressure to actually put a budget together. We can take our time to be very thoughtful about what our approach and strategy would be for long-term capital and operating staffing needs. If we move on to the next slide.
Jimmy, can I interject something for a second? So here's what I'm taking that you're saying. We've been raising the argument that, you know, we have turnover, we have people that we hire for specific jobs. And then as that job goes away, there's also people that leave. And so there's openings to move people over to. And what I think I'm hearing you say is you're going to be looking at the turnover rate and see how that can be leveraged to have the additional staff that will then move over into the positions that become open from the turnover rate. Is that what you're saying?
I think that will be a part of the part of the discussion. That's a component that we will need to look at. I think the bigger component is how fast do we want to invest in infrastructure? How much do we want to invest, and how quickly? That, I think, will be the bigger component of the strategy. But what you just mentioned in terms of what is our turnover rate and how might we be able to move people from one position to another, or move positions when they become vacant, that would also need to be part of the analysis.
I know I've used the Richard Harris example, but now we can use Alice as another example, because when Richard left, Alice moved out of engineering over to Richard's position. And that's a good show of how we take and develop and grow people, and they move over into other areas that they have the capability of moving to. So I hope that's what we'll see as you get into mid-cycle.
Yes, I think you will see some of that. And as I mentioned earlier in this, we are starting to do some of that just within the engineering department. So we have 8 people who this past fiscal year have been working on design type efforts. Because we have such an increase in what we now need to construct, we're moving 8 of those people to help with the construction management side, which naturally slows down how much design work you would be getting done. So we're trying to achieve that balance, which is, you know, in a conscious manner, which is somewhat analogous to what you just talked about, is, you know, when with Richard Harris and Alice Tui moving over from the engineering side to doing water conservation. So it is definitely an area that we need to consider and we plan on looking at.
Jimmy, Director Young has a question.
Oh, yes.
I can actually also hold, it looks like you're maybe close to an end of your part of the presentation to take questions.
Yes, I have about 3 slides left.
Okay, I'll wait.
Okay, if we move on to the next slide. So we also recognize that there are some concerns with contracting out. I guess the top of, there are two listed here. Top of the list is probably managing the performance of contractors or consultants who do planning or design work for us. I believe that will always be a challenge. We do have some consultants are better than others. Some are appropriate for certain types of work, but not others. And we do need to remain vigilant and hold these consultants and contractors accountable for the work that they do. We do that through clearly defining scope and expectations. That's our job as their clients to make sure that we do that so that we can hold them accountable for doing what we expect them to do. The other concern that's been raised is that the district does provide very good jobs for people in the community, and if we can be a provider of good employment, that also helps if we hire our own staff to do a lot of the work, and that certainly is true. I think what is also true is that, as I've mentioned earlier, contracting has been a part of our approach in the past. I think it will always be a part of our approach, and at least for this next 2 to 3 year budget cycle, we anticipate that in order to get through this period with the level of uncertainty, we are going to need to increase the level of contracting that we have. And if we move to the next slide.
Jimmy, if I may, the one thing that's left off here that comes immediately to mind with concerns or benefits of keeping the jobs in East Bay MUD is the internal knowledge, if you will, or the experience that we gain in doing projects, and just the collective intelligence, if you will, that's part of East Bay MUD. I'm surprised that's left off, but that's one I hear all the time, and one that I think we should be very concerned about in terms of keeping the knowledge of the systems that we build and the experience that we get in learning how to make these projects and design the projects, of having that experience in-house as opposed to out-of-house is an important one.
And essentially the concept is people that work for us have a vested interest in making sure the job not only is done right, but because it's done right, they can get on to other projects. Whereas the contractor comes in, goes, and oh well, So I think that's where my head is at as well.
And I acknowledge that is that, and we should probably have included that. That is a part of. I think that's what I meant by managing the performance of contractors. I think if we manage the performance of those contractors in the right manner and with the right approach, that we can mitigate some of the concerns that have been raised in that department. That is going to be an issue. That's always been an issue, but I do think that with the level of investments that we're looking at, we certainly need to balance how much we do in-house versus contractors doing the work, and we need to make sure we address the issues of performance and accountability for those particular consultants or contractors. So I acknowledge that needs to be part of it.
The other concern that I would raise, whether it's concern benefit, is the, and maybe it's implied by the second. I mean, certainly not all contractors are crappy jobs with bad benefits, but I don't know that we do, when we do have to contract out, that we do as much as we could and push as far as we can in ensuring that the contractors that we hire are providing, high road jobs to the people that they employ, which, and I'm specifically thinking about the trench soils, hauling contractors, the signaling, the people that we end up getting a lot of complaints about, frankly. But then, sort of going up the line that when we do have to send work out, that we are not just trying to send it to small local, you have, our contract equity programs, but I want to make sure that those contract equity programs are actually providing equity to the people that are employed by those firms as well. So it doesn't mean, requiring union, but it does mean, really taking a look at our employment standards or our labor standards that we apply to those that do contract with us. So this is another on the concern side. I have more to say about this when we're done, though.
Okay. And that's a good point. If we move on to the next slide, it kind of ties in with what could be some of the benefits of contracting out. We could reap the benefits of promoting participation of the small local women and Black and Indigenous people of color owned businesses, particularly during the construction phase. I think it is an area where those smaller and local firms can, on the engineering and construction side in particular, can provide a lot more input and help us to achieve our contract equity goals. One of the other things that we found out by hiring, consultants or contractors is it does expose a broader range of people to the district. It helps us in recruiting and building a more diverse and equitable workforce. And I think the other area where this could help us is assisting with our emergency preparedness and business continuity. If we do have the disaster that everybody keeps talking about, we'll have a pool of people that we can draw upon to help us recover from that kind of emergency. So I think that there are some benefits to this that we should consider and balance with the concerns that we have. And I see Director Coleman has a question.
Thank you, Jimmy. Along some of these items, I know you're almost done with your part of your presentation. Legally, for the benefits of contracting out, we need to know what we can and cannot do, and can we have a contract put in place if we're to be doing some of this, especially with emergency preparedness and business continuity, that makes certain that in the event of an emergency, EBMUD is the agency that has the ability to pull to those contractors and not other entities taking the work away from us. There's some legal issues that we would need to look at to see just exactly what we can and cannot do. I think it's important if we're going this direction, that yes, we do small local owned and minority businesses during the construction, and very much monitor not only what they're paid and their benefits, but making sure that they're meeting our expectations and the contract obligations.
And that's a really good question about the emergency preparedness. And I'll just quickly respond that, we've been looking at that for many years. And we have literally hundreds of contracts with companies that we've set up in advance, because one of the things we recognize is after an emergency, you don't want to have to set up all these contracts after the emergency. You want to have those in place before. And so that's what we've done to help with the response, balancing what we can and cannot do.
Okay, so this is next one is my last slide, and it just basically summarizes what I've presented so far. In our current pandemic climate, I think significantly growing staff at this time, at this uncertain time, is probably not a prudent thing to do. It reduces our flexibility to adjust to changing circumstances. There's still a number of unknowns as to how we will actually come out of this pandemic. You know, adding staffing also adds pressure to a challenging budget at this time. We've talked a little bit about contracting and project scheduling. You know, how fast do we invest in the infrastructure? How slow? Those are unnecessary parts, I think, of the resource balance that we will have to consider. I think particularly on the construction side, I think, you know, construction management and inspection is an area where you know, contracting could certainly help to meet our CEP goals. And as far as next steps, we do propose to discuss these capital contracting with labor. With Local 444, I believe there have also already been some discussions last week. And we do plan on meeting with Local 2019 sometime in February to kind of give them the layout of what we're thinking about for fiscal years 22 and 23. And then finally, I think that what is probably most important is to develop this long-term plan to align capital and operating resource needs with what we project to invest in our infrastructure. And we propose to do this by the spring of 2022. So that actually concludes my part of the presentation, and I think we'll take any questions. I see Director Young has a hand up.
Yeah, so my takeaway from this, and I want to be careful in the way that I phrase it, I think. I think it is extremely prudent at this time, like between now and whenever we're PC post-COVID, to not to, you know, sort of recognize the stresses that our jurisdictions and our customers are under, and to be cautious about, you know, sort of diving in, you know, full on to what we had been planning pre-COVID. And over that year or whatever it is, if that means, you know, so it does mean making commitments to new staff when we're trying to make sure we avoid laying off staff or doing furloughs or doing other things that other jurisdictions are having to do while we're in this small period makes sense. My worry or anxiety that got raised by this presentation seems to be pointing in the direction of, hey, this is an opportunity to increase contracting out. And I'm not saying, Jimmy, that that's what, or staff, that that's what you intend, but it does come out that way. I think, and I look at that, you know, the charts that we've seen for years about the work that we need to do over the coming years, and I don't see us with a real end in sight for the length of a career of most people. So I'm much more in the vein of how do we, you know, do as much as we can to retain the kind of high quality workforce that we have in-house to do this work, and contract out, you know, only when it makes, you know, sense, according to the, you know, sort of precepts that we've put in place. And so I think it makes a lot of sense to come back at, you know, spring of 2022 with that long-term plan to really look at it. But I really, you know, want to strongly caution against this is, you know, that we're, you know, opening the doors and windows here for doing a lot more contracting out.
Right.
I think that sense the, you know, really the wrong would be a very big turnaround from, you know, our past practice and this organization's, you know, integrity around building a public sector workforce. So I'm expressing my fear and anxiety more than I think maybe the reality, but I just want to send a, from my own personal point of view, that it's right to be cautious this year, but that did not signal a long-term intention to start moving our work out, out to bid. So I'll leave it at that. So it's not a question. I don't have a question unless you want to respond.
Maybe we'll hear from a
point. We're going to have a lot of people retiring. On the retirement board, we've seen those numbers of what's coming our way, and so it's a balance that has to be achieved to maintain what we have. I mean, we've never done a layoff in the entire history of East Bay MUD. And while we don't want to overstaff, we certainly want to plan for those retirements that are coming along also, as well as the new technology and work that's developing. There's a lot of stuff coming down the pike that we've got to get to. You heard me talk about the 3D printing. Well, it's getting cheaper and cheaper, and it won't be before too long we'll be doing that ourselves rather than going to somebody in San Leandro and saying, can you print up this valve for us? So all of that figures into what Marguerite said, and I agree with you 100%, Marguerite.
and Director Young,
Lisa, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I do. I have a moment before Big Saw is going to be going in my background, so let me just take it. So I want, this piggybacks on something Doug pointed out earlier about 4%, what we get for 4% versus 5%. And I'd like to see a side-by-side slide comparison, what we get for 4% versus what we get for 5%. And then, Jimmy, you talked about funded staffing positions since 2012. I think it was 232. But how many of those were actually filled? Because, over the years, I've learned there's a very big difference between funded positions and actually filled positions. So can you get me that information?
Yes, I believe we can do that.
Okay.
All right, Andy, I saw your hand.
Yeah, thank you. Director Young said it very eloquently, so I don't have very much more to add to it. I also do want to lift up her earlier comment before the long one, that we should be paying very close attention to the quality of jobs that we're contracting out with, to the extent that we are contracting out. I would like to see a capital improvement plan, a budget that does maximize use of district forces. We are encountering a different economy, but I do think that we're able to manage, given that we have a very good long-term sustainability planning, fiscal sustainability planning that we've been engaged in, that we're continuing to engage in, that we should be able to manage this with a stable workforce to a very good extent. That was a very broad general presentation. So it's hard to judge what's being proposed, but I don't see the need to take a very dramatic turn from primarily focusing on district forces for the work that we are able to do. Naturally for certain types of projects that we simply don't anticipate repeating, we contract those out, as we always have. But I just don't have enough clarity from the presentation to really understand further. And I would like to see our just going back to the general concept of what is our overall rates and budget. I want to make sure that we're still on track for getting up to, moving along on our 10 to 40 plan, moving along on rehabilitating our core infrastructure of pipes. So those are things that I'm interested in as well.
Any other questions at this time? All right, Jimmy, I'd like to make one comment on chart 38. Seemed to me to be significant. This was the cash flows for engineering, and I seem to recall you made a statement about that they would taper off in fiscal year 30 or so. But I'm looking at this chart and I'm saying, I'm seeing only growth. And if it continues on to fiscal year 30, or that seems to me a basis to expand our engineering team and not to be doing. I'm not sure what the average tenure is for someone. So in other words, when we hire them, are they here for 20 years as an engineer or 10 years? Or it seems to me the engineers, there seems to be more turnover than some of the other positions we have here, and so I'm all for being more flexible. I look at the fiscal year 08, 09, where there was obviously a peak, and hiring when there's those sorts of peaks. But I'm looking at this chart and I'm seeing growth into the at least next 5 years, or a pretty steady increase in demand for that. And so, unless I'm misreading this chart of what this is, I'm not understanding. But I would like to. I think if I've got the understanding correctly, I'd be interested to see this projected out for another 5 years or so. And then so the question, I guess, one is, am I interpreting this chart correctly? And two, what is the average tenure of an engineer or design engineer here?
So I think all those are excellent questions, and I think this graph goes out to FY26. The prior chart, the graphic of the big projects that Jimmy had before, shows out to FY2030, and you can see where we have when Jimmy was talking about we might see a decline starting in 2030. Is you see that all those large infrastructure projects, the treatment plants, the large open cut reservoirs, those will be done, and then we're going to be with more routine pipeline replacements, pumping plant, and tank rehabilitations. And so, considering what Director Young and Director Katz and Director Mellon and everyone has shared with us, that's what Jimmy's going to look at is, what realistically, when you look at all these projects, when will it start tapering off these large projects to more routine projects? What is the average tenure of an employee? How many retirements do we anticipate in the next decade? And so all that's going to go into the plan to look at what is that sustainable base rate of work that we have that we should staff to, looking at what our infrastructure rehabilitation is going to look like going forward. And we thought it was a good idea to do that analysis this year, and again, be cautious this year, but come back with a really detailed analysis to say, what is that sustainable rate that I think everybody is sharing with us, and find that right base rate, so that when we do contract out, we follow those principles that we share with you of when we choose to contract out. And as we start looking at this, it did require a lot more thinking, and we felt that give us that year to do that analysis made the most sense.
Sounds great. Thank you, Clifford. Jimmy? Bill, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I
Do you have a
just
comment?
had a comment, and I think in these uncharted times, particularly this fiscal year and next, a lot will be learned from our given situation. I think we're all on the same page as it relates to staffing and contracting out. I don't think there's any major difference there. I do think, though, during this 2-year period, it gives us an opportunity to see if some of the assumptions that we have are right, and some of the reality of what happens during this COVID time, during the uncharted time that we've never had before. And we also have to be cognizant of protection of the workforce. I think that's an important piece to put in. And I want to congratulate staff on bringing this forward. I think it's the kind of inside look we need to do, and maintaining our relationship as a family of EBMUD. Staff all included. You've given some good direction for me looking this over. And I got all my papers spread out in front of me, Jimmy. Thank you.
So I think we're ready, if there's no other questions, to move on to the next section, which is a follow-up on some of the questions from the SEC workshop. And Sophia, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much. So there were several questions that remained from the SEC workshop follow-up, and we wanted to address some of them here and some we are continuing to work on, and we'll come back to you with responses at the next workshop. The ones we wanted to respond to here were, one, the question about Region 1 single-family residential consumption, and the question was really about the use of Region 1 average consumption for the SCC, given that there's a natural distribution in the data for water use. And so we just wanted to share that while the median water use is lower than the average, that all three regions have a similar distribution and a similar skew. And this is really consistent with typical residential water use patterns. And so using the average allows us essentially to recoup, the value of the assets, from the average user in the SCC calculation. So the next question was around, is there some way to provide an adjustment for new home builds that are built particularly to have low water use, that might, for example, have a gray water system that's built into it or something like this. So we did some research, and we did find a utility in Maryland that requires LEED certification for buildings that are applying for a decrease in their SCC. And what it requires is that they have periodic recertification to maintain that reduced fee in effect. So they have to pay for certification every few years that the gray water system is still functioning. And so we don't recommend at this time this kind of an approach due to the long-term monitoring, enforcement, and fee collection issues from future owners. The way that the ordinance is set up is that if let's say a future owner decides they don't want to operate the system, the city goes back and says, hey, by the way, we need to recertify your house as continuing to be LEED certified, and you have to pay this cost. And they say, oh, I don't want to pay that cost, I'm not operating that. Then they have to pay essentially the difference in the SCC. So this felt like a bit of a complicated way. It was interesting though. So at this time, we're not recommending that kind of an approach. The last issue that we wanted to provide response on was developer communications on the SCC update. There was a question about, given that the SCC, may change, will that change the development patterns that we're seeing? So there has been no update that's slowdown, to date that we've noticed. And we are sending notices to applicants with new connection requests, letting them know that there was a workshop, providing the link to the workshop, and also making them aware that the proposed update doesn't consider refunds if a lower charge were approved. So those were the three items that we wanted to provide follow-up on. And with that, we can move on to the next slide, which is workshop summary and schedule, unless there are some remaining questions on the SCC. So with respect to the workshop summary, we started off with the words, I think it was on the second or third slide, sustainable and resilient, and that being kind of the underpinning of this proposal. And we believe that this budget projection allows us to continue to maintain water affordability through lower rate increases than we had previously projected, but continuing to support our investments in ongoing maintenance, key infrastructure, our diversity and inclusion master plan, implementation of racial justice and equity changes to implement the resolution that was put in place by the board, and continuing to enhance our affordability efforts. This also allows us to maintain staffing levels. We're not proposing any change in net staffing, or any changes in pay. The water, the point being there's no furloughs or anything like that that's in this budget. Just as a reminder, the previous projection had been 5% for water, 4% for wastewater. The projections that we're making now with what we've presented today are 4%, and 4% for wastewater, so both. And then we move on to the next slide. We did want to just take the opportunity to point out a potential issue, and this has to do with the wet weather charges that we place on the tax roll. So a decision is needed. We need a decision from the board on the cancellation of the summer board meeting. Generally, the July 27th board meeting, that would have been this year, would be canceled rather than the second meeting in August. And given the schedule for placement of the FY22 wet weather facilities charge on the tax roll, the way that it sort of works is, you'll remember we have a Prop 218 hearing, and that actually approves, this is the rate. And then there's a second hearing to actually place it on the tax roll, and that's under the Health and Safety Code. And also at that Health and Safety Code hearing, 5 members must vote to approve placement, 5 of the 7. So if for whatever reason the board didn't approve our June 8th public hearing, the rates at our public hearing, scheduled public hearing date at present, then the board would need to hold a special meeting given the July cancellation date to be able to make sure that the taxes could be placed on the roll. And at that special meeting, there would need to be 5 members that voted yes. So if there were people that had already planned something to be away and weren't able to attend, and there were only 6 or 5 people have to vote yes to place that. So it does create some challenges with timing. Specifically with regards to the timing, the word from wastewater is that the special meeting, if the board didn't approve on June 8th, the 218 rates and charges would need to be held between July 26th and July 30th. So that would be an extra special meeting that would be held there. So it may make planning for that period for board members difficult or potentially challenging. So that was one issue we wanted to make sure to get direction on today. And so with that, we can move on to our next slide, which just is a summary of our schedule moving forward. So we've held now our first board workshop. March 23rd will be our next board workshop incorporating feedback that we received today. We also will be providing you a draft of the Prop 218 notice that we would plan to mail, and would be asking for your approval to mail that. We do have a date that we've held, March 30th, as a contingency special board meeting if it's not approved at the March 23rd workshop. And we're proposing essentially to have the notice printed and mailed starting the April 2nd to April 23rd period, so that the ones that are mailed at the end make the 45-day mailing requirement. We also have a third board workshop date, April 13th, if that is needed as well. And then we have scheduled currently June 8th for the public hearing, where the board would consider adoption of the budget. And so with that, I think we are ready to take some board comments. There are a few things that I believe we're hoping to receive direction on. So one is cancellation of the July meeting. A second is any thoughts or direction with regards to the city and agency collection charges that we currently bill for. And also, we did want to let you know that one of the things that we continue to work on is trying to work with our staffing that Jimmy had talked about to kind of create long-term career paths and make sure that we work together as teams to be able to do that, and that is challenging. We're working on updating classifications. Laura's team is working very hard, but those are some of the things that we have considered. So with that, I think Clifford, do you have any other further comments before we take?
We have looks like one public comment.
We have President Lenny. We have Eric Larson for public comment. I'm going to go ahead.
All right.
Okay, I'm going to unmute the line. Eric, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you for taking my comment. This is Eric Larson, President AFSCME Local 444. I do want to thank the directors for their comments and questions around the contracting out issues that were raised at the presentation today. I do want to provide that 444 responding to planned and unplanned vacancies as a reason for contracting out. We acknowledge the need of contracting out to reduce peak workloads or where there's specialized work that we don't normally perform. However, responding to planned and unplanned vacancies suggests that it would be legitimate to contract out our work for the time period that it takes to fill vacancies. We are continue to be in a de facto hiring freeze. That is, 444 positions continue to experience a de facto hiring freeze as HR has not figured out how to conduct many in-person tests that are needed to fill positions such as heavy equipment operators, heavy transport operators. I have quite a list of 444 represented positions that recruitment have not as yet determined how to conduct in-person testing. In terms of reducing FM&O, I have received information that management plans to add one heavy transport operator to decrease trucking, fully maintained and operated trucking contracts. That is, 444 believes insufficient. Further, it was stated that management has discussed with 444 staffing plans for the next 2 years. We have received no special meeting dedicated to staffing and contracting out issues, only brief discussion at our regular and recurring labor management committee meeting and the regular and recurring contracting out committee meetings. We received no formal report. In fact, the manager who was discussing with us at the labor management committee meeting didn't even have an exact number or classifications of positions that were going to be added for 444 to reduce FM&O. So we hope that management will meet with us soon and provide a dedicated meeting to discuss staffing and contracting out issues in the very near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Noting that we are 3 minutes to 11, but we want to make sure and have everyone have a chance to weigh in on things that they've heard today. We'll just kind of go around the horn. Clifford, before we start, I wanted to ask you, though, this decision needed on cancellation of the summer board meeting, are you taking feedback for that? Are we making an actual vote decision to cancel that here, or how does that?
I think if you can give us some feedback on that one, and partly what Sophia was presenting is just to make you aware that if things don't go as scheduled, we might have to have that special meeting. So provide some feedback on that. And that was something that was discussed a year or so ago about canceling the second board meeting in July.
All right. Who wants to start off? Any comments we haven't already covered?
I'll start. Question on the end of July board meeting. I mean, we've also had the issue where we've needed a special board meeting in the August period in election years. So it's not, we've had that eventuality in the past. How often have we had to go to that second July board meeting to approve, to deal with the rates and charges issue in the past? Has it ever happened before?
I think in our collective memory, it's happened twice in let's say 25 years or something like that.
Okay, so it's possible but unlikely.
Yeah, that's fair.
And has that been due to the five board member vote, or?
No, no, it wasn't.
It's been for other reasons.
The 5-member vote is for the second public hearing, not for the 218 hearing, and that we just started doing the second public hearing about 2 years ago.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm still in favor of canceling the second July board meeting because I've already made plans associated with that. At least tentative plans. And I appreciate the workshop and made my comments in the contracting out section. What was the third thing that you wanted feedback on, Sophia?
City, the collection charges, if there was any thought or direction about continuing to charge for the city's sewer collection charges.
Well, I think if they're not cooperating, then no. With the, conforming to the customer assistance schedule, then, I think we need to start figuring out how they move those charges. Especially given the backlog of debt, consumer debt that we have from our customers. Which is largely, at least in Oakland, due to City of Oakland charges, or at least half due to that. So that's my take on that.
All right. Anyone, any other comments? So we just,
Sure. Doug, this is John. I can do it real quick. I'm fine with canceling the meeting on the 27th, and if we need to, we can always reschedule. And especially on the issue of collecting property tax, if that's one of the key issues that we're looking at, that's never been a problem in the past to begin with. And from a historical perspective, the reason the meetings that we had to do for budget and rates was due to the fact of noticing, I think, an adequate time for the public and stuff. In terms of the cities, I don't have a problem as well, as Marguerite said, of having them do the billing. It's a 7.7% part of our rates, primarily in Alameda County. But this has also created so much confusion, and it's not counting the amount of staff time when people are calling up asking why are they being charged this, this, and this. And so there's actually maybe a benefit. I appreciate everything staff has done to go from 5 to 4%. I just think we need to look at all options, be cautious, as Marguerite mentioned earlier today, and have an outline of what Clifford talked about. I'd like to know what our scheduled retirements are over the next 10 years, forecasted. Obviously, we don't know for certain, and which positions and how many positions, and what the impact would be to the district operations. So those are my comments. Thank you.
All right, thank you, John. Andy?
Thanks. First, I would like some additional options to work with that we can evaluate based on some metrics like the impacts on contracting out, the benefits and impacts on pushing out infrastructure rehabilitation. So I'd like to see budget options that include rates that go up to 5% in the second year. So I'd like a scenario as staff has proposed for 4 and 4, but I'd also like to see scenarios for budget and rates of 4 and 5 and 5 and 5, just so that we can understand what we could do with that. Could we operate better with that? Could we perform our mission better with those resources as our customers expect us to do? And then we can consider the benefits and trade-offs at that time. I think this is something that we need analysis about, but I definitely appreciate the comparison with other agencies that staff has presented to us so that we can understand how we fit in with our community in the broader region. But that said, I think we have never been the agency in recent years that has accepted crumbling. We have been the agency that wants to prevent that deterioration of our infrastructure, and it does not seem like the time to needlessly shy away, but we do need to operate within realistic means. So I'd like those choices, primarily so that we're able to have a fair shot at getting through the second workshop with only a second workshop and not a third. I'm willing to do a third if we still need to have that conversation, but I think having some choices on the table and some analysis of those choices will help us complete the work in a second workshop. I also will, for the purposes of this year only, I agree that we made some commitments about our schedule, and especially since board members may have plans, agree that that's the schedule I can work with. I can also schedule a special meeting if that's necessary for a brief meeting for special action. As far as I do agree that we need to insist on affordability for our customers who are facing city imposed rates. Since the two cities that have not taken action are in my ward, I will offer to work with staff to communicate with the elected officials, since it appears that we have not had a discussion at the elected official level. The discussions have appeared to only be at the staff level. So it seems like it's the time to make sure that we have that conversation at the decision maker level, because we are approaching a point where we need to make a decision too.
Frank.
First of all, talking about rates higher than what staff has brought to us, I think would be insane. We've got too many people out there that are out of work, that are hurting. We're going to be putting ourselves in a position where we're contributing to the problem. It's tough to do the kind of stuff that has been presented to us by Clifford and Sophia, but that is even doing a general rate increase of 4%. I can see us catching some flack for it, but it's so much more. I think it'll be so much more acceptable. With regards to the issues on getting the cities to pony up the money, yeah, what's taking them so long? I mean, it's just that simple. We've been carrying the heat all these years. It's about time. But the staffing issue, it's a big issue. And one of the things that you do is successorship planning. And successorship planning is not only at the executive levels, but it's at the overall workforce levels, whether it's an engineer or a plumber, or it's an administrative clerk or the like. Successorship planning, if it's not done, then you wind up having vacancies when you don't need them, and really hurting on the ability of the organization. Thank you.
All right, Lisa, you want to go next? Bill, why don't you go next? Lisa might have some noise in the background or something.
Yeah, I made my comments earlier. I think reducing us down to 4% is something that we can really look at as we go. We have 2 years in that budget cycle, and if we fall short in the first year, we have a little time to make up. My principal concern is making sure that we can have an adequate presentation for the people we serve, carrying them forward. I think our concerns with respect to the union raised concern, contracting out and whatnot, we really don't have an option for that, because the planning has to have flexibility to go with the 4%. If you don't do that, then you have to go back to 5%. And everybody understands that these are difficult times, particularly for people in my ward. And I want to say, in the face of EBMUD across the board, everybody's going to be lumped into that category. Those are my final comments to go with my earlier ones. I think staff has given us some options that we can work with, and it's then up to us as a board, as the future meetings come up, to frame it and put it in perspective as it relates to how we see things at that time.
All right, thank you, Bill. Lisa, are you available for comment? I will, my comments basically, I believe that I've made most of my comments with regard to the contracting out. Look forward to both the staff working closely with our employees or staff working with staff here to figure this out and to come up with a solution that can work and that makes sense in these uncertain times, an uncertain future. And the July date, I have some tentative vacation plans, but given uncertainty in all things, an August, end of August might even be a better time to plan for trips than early July, just given vaccine schedule and stuff. So I have some flexibility there, I believe. And then I agree with Andy. I think his comments came closest to my thinking on terms of including Oakland and other cities' rates, our collection on our bill. Maybe it's time for us to have some elected to elected meetings to try and sort that out. But I'd like to continue some way to keep. There's a certain efficiency we've all agreed in having their billings on our bill, but no reason for us to take the heat for that. And finally, I wanted to make a comment on the adjustment to the SEC for low water use. I'm very intrigued by this Maryland example. I can see why the complexities of trying to implement that here doesn't make it something that immediately we might want to implement. But I do think that there's some potential there for us, and I think we should continue to explore that and look for ways that we could use that to encourage it. It's both the right thing from in terms of a what we want to do to reward those people who are using less water, and it seems to me that there should be some way that we can figure it out if there's a threat that there's going to be a large amount of money that's going to have to be paid if they aren't consistent with the lead standards that they agreed to earlier. That might keep them in compliance with such lead standards or something. So it just seems to me that we might be able to figure this one out and have one more tool to encourage people to conserve water and developers to build buildings that are set up to conserve water. So.
Yeah, I just want, can we bring that to the sustainability, bring that conversation or discussion to the sustainability committee? Because I think there's large developers, but there's also homeowners. And if we can do something to coordinate or collaborate with building departments and changes in building codes that allow or encourage, basically hard infrastructure opportunities, our SEC can become, like Doug says, an incentive, or the disincentive of having to pay a higher SEC could help, instigate more, environmentally friendly, climate friendly construction.
We'll bring that to a future committee meeting.
Okay.
That's a great idea to take it there. Lisa's still waiting to see if you're available to make comments. Otherwise, we'll call this workshop to a close. All right. Well, I will then suggest that staff reach Lisa for her comments separately from this. Clifford, anything else?
That is it. Thank you for all the great feedback, and that's all we have.
All right. So we will take a 5-minute break and move on to our closed session?
I think just looking at the time, maybe if it's possible, we can go to closed session and then have the break between closed session, public comment, and the meeting.
That sounds good. Frank, did you have something you look like you're?
No, I just wanted to say very quickly, as far as the date for the break, whatever works for everybody will work fine for me.
Okay. Great. All right. We'll see you in closed session then.